Hello, I am Questron, a European Grandmaster Sombra player. Last week, I posted a video that went over pretty much every take or opinion I have regarding Sombra, and it kinda goes without saying that I poked the beehive with that one, fellas. For the ones that haven't seen the video is about, well, Sombra. She's a very divisive character, and I so happen to have a couple thousand hours on her in high-ranked experience. So, from my own perspective, the main reasons I personally think Sombra is so hated has to do with the idea that her entire kit is very front-loaded with no wiggle room. A very much binary gameplay loop where either she's on someone and only one person with the explicit purpose of getting value, or she's nowhere. Increasing the amount of time she engages would make the problem worse. The solution would be to decrease her reliance on stealth and add either more mobility without creating a new gameplay loop, like by having her have a shorter translocator cooldown if she forgoes stealth. Now, I pulled the pin on that video, tossed it into the room, closed the door, and boom, we have 1,000 comments. So here I am with a part 2 based on what the average Overwatch player thinks instead. It's every opinion you could possibly want out of me for what you think should happen to Sombra. While I was a bit wishy-washy on it in the initial video, I'm not literally saying Sombra should absolutely not get reworked. I personally think that we haven't seen the most ideal version of this current iteration of it. I'd first want to see that version, at the very least have it be tested to some extent. So under the assumption that we should not rework Sombra, there were some ideas that have been prevalent even before this video dropped about what to do. Firstly, this one usually comes from Sombra players themselves, but stealth on a separate cooldown. I have two main issues with this. One, if the goal is to decrease stealth dependency, you would need a new downside to it to dissuade it from being a load-bearing aspect in her kit. I'm inherently against this premise, but I'll dive into it a little more later in the video. And two, the point of stealth being on the translocator is to decrease its prevalence in the gameplay loop. Separate button makes it its own central pillar yet again. The big problem is that Sombra is entirely dependent on setting up. The goal is to replace the time you'd be setting up with raw participation in a fight. So in that way, setting up more often, more efficiently, fix anything. If from the get-go Sombra had time stealth like I wanted back in the day, the entire kit would be very different foundationally. Having stealth be separate as a change happen now would require a full overhaul of her kit to then still not solve the problem in it. Promote the efficiency and allow it to be used in the middle of duels and fights in the same way Tracer Recall disorients an enemy player. To put it simply, invisibility should not be the core and sole reason why the rest of her kit works to begin with. I don't think it needs to be removed for it to not be load-bearing. And then we have the dreaded skillshot virus concept that I kept seeing over and over again, no thanks to a certain Spylo Overwatch content creator. The problem I have with this suggestion is that if we assume the problem is how binary her engagements are because of how front-loaded her engagements are, this makes the problem even worse. You really want to hit the skill shot, so you, even more than before, depend on stealth even more now to make sure you hit the hack, making it harder. By adding more layers of complexity on top, the problem does not fix a problem. It's retroactively trying to justify its impact, rather than questioning why you need to in the first place. And besides, we've literally done this before. We used to have hack damage boosted with permanent stealth and permanent translocator. People thought that the hack damage boost was free low-skill impact, so they replaced the action of hacking for damage with a skill shot, the virus. And now, we all hate that too, because people are hitting it. I'm okay with Sombra having hack out of stealth only if she has to snipe me at close range with a projectile that has a long cooldown that can be deflected or blocked with a shield, but also it has to be in a single window of opportunity from her stealth, and if she messes up ever so slightly, she needs to die for it. Is a shockingly common stance to have, and in my mind, it's kind of a crazy sentiment to have. This is essentially gatekeeping Sombra for only the higher ranks. To me, this isn't balance. It's shifting the goalpost to a smaller group of players. Like, yeah, I'll be fine. I'll be able to make it work, but we can't say that this is, in any sense of the word, an honest decision. Another angle of failure by suggesting changes that essentially make it impossible to get hacked by Sombra means that hack has to completely function as an extra addition to her kit. Sounds like a good idea until the problem arises that because hack is a bonus, the rest of her kit needs to get value without the concept of hack. But then hack is also there. Unless you just want to remove hack, which is still not going to fix anything because hack isn't the problem. The setup via stealth is, combined with the high level of required commitment through the translocator. And then a third issue is that it being forgiving is actually a necessary evil, because a skill shot that's assumed to not always be hit is objectively meant to be overpowered. It's balanced around it missing, not hitting. The issue is that when engaging from out of stealth, Sombra cannot miss and is designed with that in mind. So she'll play in a way to make sure she doesn't. As optimistic as I might sound when I say so, anyone can get better at something hard. Eventually, it will flip back to being oppressive and we'll be back in the same spot. That's kind of why Virus progressed the way it did with its balance patches. Initially, Virus only had 10 extra impact damage on hacked targets, and then that slowly increased, increasing the necessity to hack before virusing along the way, adding more steps in between, creating a singular possible gameplay loop that was curated to be specifically that with no nuance. It is objectively the correct way to do things. Most other common ideas thrown around is what pretty much boils down to just nerfing stuff. I was going to go over many of them individually, but after a while the things to nerf felt like grasping at straws to some extent to just see what I'd be okay with nerfing. I felt like the power vacuum analogy in the main video was pretty solid, but this is an extension of that. Going into any change with a nerf-based mindset alone is never the play, because that implies any sort of buff can and is going to happen. There were plenty of people that said, don't care, nerf this thing in her kit, without realizing that her entire kit is convoluted because of the ripple effect in it. Tracer's straightforward in design, Sombra is not. Everything in her kit is a multiplier for everything else, meaning that if you just directly take out stealth or hack, it will be put into another aspect of her kit and it will be complained about. Having a solid idea of what you do want can leave infinite room on the chopping block. Back in the day, it was that hack lockout was too long, so we just had to shorten it to be a silence and nothing more than that, cutting her utility. Back in the day, it was just that the Translocator was a get out of jail free card, so the solution was to just put it on a short timer or something, cutting her survivability. Then, the problem was that stealth was permanent, so that got put on a 5-second timer, cutting her consistency. And even after all that cutting, because the developers are aware that balance is a two-way street, we're still at the point where we hate Sombra. But despite everything I said in the video, a little bit of frustration boils up because now the saying is that all three of her elements are actually toxic. It's kind of frustrating how output-oriented the thinking is when conversing about what to do with Sombra, because it's a very rigid mentality. Whatever kills you is directly the reason she's overpowered, and because stealth isn't an ability that directly affects anyone, it goes under the radar. Not the principle of stealth, but the execution. Invisibility does not need to be removed. It needs to not be load-bearing for the rest of her kit. Like a bouncer at a nightclub, everything is affected by stealth. Everything has to pass through the bouncer. To put it in gameplay terms, Sombra's Translocator has many elements: teleport, lens, dodge, invincibility frames, and stealth. If you intend to use the Translocator for the purpose of stealth and none of the other ones, your effective downtime where you have no survivability is 1 singular second. If you forego stealth intentionally to dodge, cleanse, teleport to high ground, or whatever else, your downtime with no survivability is 6 seconds. Stealth is fundamentally part of every aspect of her kit this way, meaning to use it optimally, you use stealth regardless of if you need to. That is the problem. So then why not remove stealth? Well, I like stealth. I do like using it to feint and make people think I'm going in one direction and then sprint in another. Doing the most with the least is generally a good way to express skill. Using that concept to dismiss its importance shows a misunderstanding of the character. It shouldn't be load-bearing in her value, but it is load-bearing in her identity. The problem is that it's exclusively to be used for setting up, when it could be much more in ways that aren't considered toxic. My personal potential what-if identity for it would be to have the same effect Tracer Recall has, but more manual. Technically, Tracer's Recall makes her go invisible. It's not me pointing out a double standard, but it is pointing at the possibility of the element not inherently being toxic, just like one-shots. It relies in the execution. I genuinely think that if stealth gets fixed, the rest of her kit will fall in place properly. Refusing to acknowledge the possibility of this being able to work at all is yet again following the pattern of result-oriented nerfing, rather than premise-centered fixing. I've been on the other side of this conversation often enough to know how this plays out, because say you get your nerfs, what are we buffing instead? The frustrating part with this line of thinking is that to everyone back then, it was just as simple as you make it seem now. Translocator needed to just not be permanent to everyone back then too, and here we are, still with a problem. It's a frustrating precedent to work with in conversation, and giving leeway to the idea that we should just scrap anything is tough to do as the person actually affected here, the Sombra player. Why compromise with those that aren't willing to themselves? So what if I did want to rework then? Well, honestly, I'd turn back the clock and not have made Translocator a short distance blink. Maybe a 10-second timer I can manually cancel. And I definitely put stealth on a short timer. From that point on, it's a very much trial and error based system to figure out how to get away with with it. I know it's not a satisfying answer, but as long as the core principle for it is solid and future-proof, I'm okay with anything. I'm not against the idea of a rework. I unfortunately think this version of Sombra is one wake-up call type patch away from being solid. Either way, I'll get to make a YouTube video about it, I guess, so subscribe for that. In the initial video, I mentioned to make hack more situational, but kinda shrugged it off for really no reason. So here goes. My issue with hack is that hack is a default entry point ability while simultaneously being load bearing. This means that you are forced to constantly restart engagements over and over and over because only right at the start do you have the highest chance of winning the interaction. I should have explored the idea a bit more when I mentioned that I want hack to be more situational, like how I mentioned that in Overwatch 1, hack was just the ability lockout, and sometimes if the cooldowns were already on cooldown, then hack would be worthless. Having hack be a possibility rather than necessity means Sombra doesn't get punished for having uptime. When Virus was introduced, there was a brief period afterwards where her impact damage was only 10 damage. The difference in total damage done from a hacked Virus and a regular Virus was literally just 10 bonus damage. It felt like somewhat of a Goldilocks zone for hack. Hack had no damage boost aside the Virus sped up damage, so hack was purely utility. It felt like somewhat of a Goldilocks zone. Should probably remove the first mention of the Goldilocks zone. I did not see that I have that double. Oh well. I really liked that version of her. Got the top 100 on multiple accounts, and judging by how many people felt sorry for Sombra players thinking she got gutted, she didn't seem too oppressive back then to boot. For the ones commenting about how I'm just upset I never get to play Sombra, I've kept a tracker for every game whether Sombra got banned or not at the start of the season, and I'm sitting at 24 Sombra bans out of 175 total games played this season now. I'm playing Sombra just fine, don't you worry. With all that being said, there will be no third video. I don't particularly like being taken seriously, I'm just here making content for the fun of doing the content creation. I only made the last video and this video to both be able to refer people to them if they intend to kickstart a debate from Twitch chat while I stream, as well as hopefully steer the ship and let it cruise on autopilot afterwards for whatever is in store for Sombra. The next video I'm posting isn't even gonna be about specifically Sombra either. Twitch chat plays Overwatch. Ha!